The sound of praise for your Sunday morning.
The only one who could ever teach me.
Introducing Reverend A.R. Bernard of the Christian Cultural Center.
Was the son of a preacher man.
And Rabbi Joseph Paterson of Religion on the Line.
The only one who could ever teach me.
Now, on Talk Radio 77 WABC, here's the Rev and the Rabbi, where faith matters.
Good morning, I'm Rabbi Joseph Paterson.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
Reverend, I understand now what an Exodus looks like. You go to the Bible, you see there the Exodus from Egypt to the Promised Land. New York City, Exodus, the Hamptons, the Jersey Shore, everywhere the city is empty. So,
well, I'm glad you qualified that, because when you say Exodus, everybody's thinking people are leaving and moving to the south. You know,
well, that's happening
You're
too.
You're talking about vacation here. Qualify that, Rabbi, because we don't want the mayor's office to get upset with us. You know.
Anyway, Rev, I saw an article which really touched me. It was about the first Orthodox Jewish baseball player. Name is Jacob Steinmetz, and he's with the Arizona Diamondbacks. Because he's Orthodox, he keeps kosher, so the team arranges for kosher food to be brought to any destination where he's playing. He doesn't travel on the Sabbath, so the team arranges for him to stay at a nearby hotel, or in some cases, an Airbnb when there's no hotel right nearby. And I thought to myself, this is a great statement on America, that you can be committed to your faith and still be part of the general culture. In a sense, you can be part of two worlds. What do you think?
You know, Rabbi, I look, I have mixed interpretations of that, because I'm a Christian living in America, which is ceremonially and culturally a Christian nation. Mm-hmm. It was built on the, Protestant tradition, and then, opened its doors for Catholics and Jews, etc. But when it comes to actually having this kind of cooperation, everybody doesn't get that. Even, Christians. I will say that Jews and even Muslims get a greater degree of cooperation. And, when it comes to religious ritual, religious observance. But I have dealt with Christians who have attempted to do that, and they've gotten pushback. Now, I have ideas why. I'm curious to know what you think about that before we talk about this particular individual.
Well, I'm trying to think of examples. I'm not familiar with examples in the Christian world where someone would be denied some kind of accommodation. What would be an example of that?
Well, the question is always the legitimacy of the request. What the Jewish culture, as well as religion, has done successfully, and even the Muslims here in the United States, their faith is so tied to their culture that it's more readily accepted that this is a part of who they are and this is what they do. But with Christians, the question is, are you just trying to get a day off? Or do you really practice your faith to that degree as a Christian that it warrants some type of accommodation?
What kind of settings? For example, I know in the Jewish world, there has been a fight over the years for religious accommodation. There are firms that wouldn't hire Jews. One of the reasons being, they don't work on Jewish holidays, on the Sabbath, all kinds of restrictions. They're not going to come in like everybody else. We've seen it in government where we had a fight for it over the years to get reasonable accommodation. I'm just trying to think, where would a Christian find opposition to a request to?
Okay, so I have to be careful here because, it involves, maybe a government agency, civil service worker, in particular industry where they've applied and they've been turned down And the notion was behind the scenes that, this was just a day off accommodation, not that they really are practicing their faith to that degree. Now, even within, Judaism, you have Orthodox, you have Reform, you have cultural Jews, you have political left, political right, center. I mean, it's not monolithic, but there seems to be a less of a questioning when it comes to Muslims and Jews, or even Sikh, than Christian. And I don't know if it's because we are the dominant faith tradition that has influenced and shaped American culture, and we have a lot of cultural Christians, but not practicing Christians. What are your thoughts?
No, where would it? I'm trying to think of what setting would that apply. Christian,
A Sunday.
If you really want to keep the Sabbath.
You're working, and that's our church day. That's when we gather.
Yeah.
In my faith tradition, we follow certain rules. We follow, we're not cultural Christians. We adhere to our faith. We subscribe to our faith in every way. And, but getting a day off, if I work for maybe a particular agency or within a certain industry, civic service, civil service, it can be a pushback.
I would say
so. It's interesting that you raised this. I mean, this is all around, the accommodations made for a baseball player, which, we understand even more accommodations made there in the sports world.
Yeah.
But
I just think, what I tell you why, it reminded me in the old Jewish quarter in Czechoslovakia, there's a clock. One side of the clock has Roman numerals, the other side has Hebrew letters. And one side of the clock, Roman numeral side, clockwise, Jewish, the Hebrew letters, counterclockwise. And that, to me, teaches us that you have to try to be part of two worlds realistically. When I went to Yeshiva University, the word synthesis was emphasized because you would take your Hebrew classes, your religious classes, let's say till 12, 1 o'clock, and then you'd have your secular classes. And the whole idea was that Yeshiva University could bring together those two worlds and teach you. So you could be a doctor, for example, and you could go to services, keep kosher, follow all the tenets of your faith, and yet go into the medical world and do well. There was no conflict, so to speak. You could do both with accommodation. Of course, years ago, there were hospitals that wouldn't accept Jewish doctors, so we formed Jewish hospitals. You look at Mount Sinai, Beth Israel. They were founded because doctors couldn't get into those other hospitals. I just think it's a great statement, not perfect in the terms of the accommodation, but certainly better than it was. And there's a recognition that a person comes with a certain tradition that we have to respect. We try as best we can to accommodate that tradition within our particular setting. Of course, if it's a kind of setting, if you're a ball player, and I've seen this, ball players who play on Christmas Day, ball players who play on Sundays, and I think many would say to you, well, that's an important day of the week in sports. That's an important holiday for major sporting events. It could be conflicted.
Yeah, and again, the perception is that a greater degree of Jews follow their ritual and practice than Christians. That's, again, perception is how you interpret things, the meaning that you give to what you see, and that determines how you experience it. There is that perception. And I think, it affects, from what I've encountered trying to help some of my parishioners who, want to have their Sabbath off and yet need a letter. They need some type of validation, you know what I mean, that it's a legitimate request. And I don't know, do you have to go through that also?
Absolutely. I've had over the years people who are working for airlines. I remember that example.
That's a good example.
Right, yeah. Where you met opposition since you couldn't work on certain dates and days. Look, we had a fight to get here. It wasn't something that automatically came, well, we live in a democratic world. Of course, we respect all different people. Those are all platitudes that we offer all the time. The reality is that we didn't accommodate, that we didn't offer the kind of necessary accommodation that would allow people to keep their faith. So we fought to get here. Because years ago, I use the ball player example. If you were a ball player who was religious, there's a good chance you were not going to get on the team because you're going to say, what a pain in the neck this is. This is just going to be difficult. The kosher food, the hotels, who needs this? We can get another ball player. But today, at least we live at a time where, you know what? That's not going to be an impediment to your success. Same thing is true with, let's say, in the hospital setting. Doctors say, I won't practice in the hospital on the Sabbath or on Jewish holidays, right? Years ago, you wouldn't be treated, equally. So you had to fight for it. And at least we're at a place that's better than where we were, not where we want to be. But I think we can be proud of the moment.
Do you think that's because we're becoming more and more religiously pluralistic as a nation, as a society?
That's a good question. I think the courts have ruled in favor of accommodation. So that certainly is in our favor. I'd like to think that people recognize that, life is a little more complex. It's not just, you don't see a person in a one-dimensional fashion. You see people who have other aspects of their life that have to be recognized and respected. So I think it's because we fought for it. Look at civil rights as an example. If you didn't fight for it, or if we didn't fight for it, with one another, for one another, you wouldn't be in this place. It didn't come automatically. And that's what I'm saying. It comes at a price, but it's worth the price when you finally get there.
Let me play devil's advocate here. All right. So, but this is America. It's a different world. It's a different society, a predominantly different faith tradition that has shaped and informed the culture. Why should we accommodate? Why not we? Just talking about the nation as a whole. Why should this context accommodate for your faith practices?
Because we say all people are created equal.
Unpack that, Rabbi.
Right, all people are created equal. Do we all have that innate dignity that has to be protected? And for my dignity to be protected, you have to respect who I am as a person, following the tenets of my tradition. That, to me, is what it's all about. America, we say you can be who you want. You have the right to believe and the right to disbelieve. And we can't reach that aspiration unless we put it into practice. So on July 4th weekend here, where we talk about independence, we talk about, we fought again.
Perfect segue. Yeah, go ahead.
We fought to be a free country, free of the imposition of church on the people, where you could practice your tradition without imposition by the government, separation of church and state, which has to be examined carefully because people look at it in a very simplistic way. Like, you can't talk about religion in the public arena, and that's not what it meant.
Right.
So I think we're healthier, but not at that desired destination.
I think that it's part of in addition to what you just said, I think it's part of the American promise. I mean, people come here for that word, freedom. They hear constitutional freedom of religion, freedom of speech. I mean, freedom is the theme. Of course, freedom works within certain boundaries. Otherwise, we'll lose that freedom. But, this is the American promise. This is what people believe they can come here and experience and start a new life. They're not breaking down the borders of many, many other countries the way they're breaking down the borders to get into the United States, into America, right?
Yeah.
That's very, very real. But do you agree that, is it the American promise that we have to live up to?
I would hope so. Otherwise, I think we've been misled and misleading others all these years. To me, it's, if we are different than so many others where you don't have freedom of choice, where you can't be who you want to be, when you're depicted in a certain way, that's not the America we feel is a blessing to our people. That's why I was taken with the story, because years ago, I'm not sure this young man would have been treated the same way. I think it took a long time to get to this place, but I'm glad we're here.
I like what you just said. It's part of the story. It's part of the American narrative. And I think that's what many people miss when they are being critical. There's one thing to critique the American narrative from its inception to where we are today. All right. It's another thing to be critical of it when, if you read the history carefully, it was an experiment.
Mm-hmm.
It was an experiment in something totally new. And yes, it definitely had its flaws. It's more than flaws. It's some of its atrocities, I would say. But it was an experiment in a democratic republic, a liberal democracy. And of course, in those days, liberal didn't mean what it means today. Liberal was the word that allowed for expansion, allowed for openness, allowed for inclusivity and embrace. It was not the extremes that, political parties are taking it to today. But that's the experiment, that we are a liberal democracy, and that it works. This is a form of government, after so many forms of government throughout history, that works. It brings equity and justice and fairness and the opportunity to explore, to pursue, to give the language in the Constitution, life, liberty, and happiness. But Rabbi, let's continue the conversation, because it has become a dysfunctional democracy. And democracies around the world are experiencing similar dysfunctionalities.
Mm. Look,
what do we say?
I think you're saying it's an experiment, but it's not a finished experiment. We've often mentioned the word perfect means finished. America's not finished. It has many, many issues that have to be resolved. When I see what's happening on campuses today, where students are afraid to walk to a classroom, where we talk about freedom of speech, but I'm not free to express, for example, my belief in being a Zionist, where I'm shouted down, I'm blocked from getting into a building. That's a stain on, the story. So we're going to find major challenges that we have to confront realistically. But if we know where we want to go, then at least there's a roadmap that says this is not where we want to be, and we're going to fight to get to that place.
And we have to be willing to work together to that end. Instead of buying into the rhetoric, buying into the polarization, buying into the disintegration of our goal, which is a more perfect union, to coin the words of our president, Abraham Lincoln. Because Lincoln did what was necessary to save the nation, regardless of his personal convictions or feelings about the economy of slavery, etc. He did what was necessary to save the Union. And that was an important point. But we are still trying to work through that perfect union. Here it is, over 100 years later.
The Emancipation Proclamation wasn't fulfilled overnight. As a matter of fact, slavery wasn't abolished immediately.
No, that's right. We had, I'm sorry for cutting you off, but you and I were talking about Juneteenth.
Right.
And the relevance, the symbolism, the meaning of Juneteenth, the fact that even though the Emancipation Proclamation was declared, put in effect, it took time before Southern states, were in cooperation with it. and it had to be enforced by Union soldiers, by military. Yeah, it's a difficult process.
Maybe the lesson that we learn in the Bible is the reason Moses didn't get to enter the promised land is because in life, no one gets into the promised land. There's always more to do. There's always the challenges ahead. You have to be aspirational, but at the same time, you have to confront reality. So you bring the divide closer to one another.
Uh-oh, you're giving new meaning to the wilderness. That's the bridge between slavery and the promised land. And well, what do you mean by we don't get to the promised land?
In other words, we all have.
Say, well, because remember, this was Dr. King's words, right?
Yeah.
I've seen the promised land, his great speech. I may not get there with you.
Well,
all right. But isn't that the promise that we hold, or is it, something fleeting?
Well, why didn't Moses step into the promised land? Because he got to bring the people to the promised land. He got to advance their lives, even though he wasn't entering. And I think the message is, when you have ideals in life, there's always one more to fulfill. There's always much more to do. You never get to close the ideal and the real, because you always have to look a little bit higher. What more can be done? And I think as long as that is our motivation, we can arrive in a better place than we were, but never the perfect place.
So you're saying that perfection is not something we achieve, but something we strive for.
Yeah. And with that in mind, we have on the line the 55th governor of the state
he should be in on this conversation. I'm sure that he's got some things to say.
Well, right now, given what's going on in Washington, all the conversations about the president, Governor Paterson is just waiting for that call. Remember years ago, he got the call, he had to become governor. Who knows? They're looking in Washington saying, who can we call in if we need someone to continue leadership? Like he's always in that bullpen.
We're going to answer that question when we come back from the break. So stay tuned to the Rev and The Rabbi right here on 77 WABC.
This is Greg Kelly for Priority Gold. What does it mean to be America's precious metals dealer? It means that you're in touch with the hearts and minds of those who love this country, value our freedom, and want to protect the future. Priority Gold is that precious metals dealer. They've helped thousands of Americans back their retirement with solid gold and silver. Call Priority Gold at 888-506-6439. Receive free shipping, free storage, a free investment guide, and one of the best purchase experiences in the industry. Call now or go to PriorityGold.com.
Where faith matters. The Rev and the Rabbi. Talk Radio 77 WABC.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Paterson.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
And as I said, no stranger to radio. I think he's on the air as much as we are, probably more so. That's Governor David A. Paterson, 55th governor of the state of New York. Good morning, Governor.
Well, good morning, and I hope you all have enjoyed the July 4th weekend.
Well, that depends on the conversation we have with you today, how enjoyable it's been.
I enjoyed mine, Reverend.
I always enjoy talking to you.
I enjoyed mine.
Yeah. So I'm watching the George Latimer victory celebration, and right next to George Latimer, Rev, is David A. Paterson. Mm-hmm. And I was very happy to see you there because, Governor, the fact that he was able to defeat someone who really, promulgated such hatred, anti-Semitism, and to see Latimer win it was a statement that ultimately hatred is going to do you in. You're not going to be a victorious candidate if your platform is predicated on hating others. In this case, it was a lot of anti-Semitism. What do you say?
Rabbi, I wish I could just hang up the phone and just listen in to the rest of the show. You hit the nail right on the head. And the difference between this race and other races is that this wasn't a choice between moderate Democratic political policy and progressive political policy. There are plenty of people who are progressives who are in our Democratic Party who run races all the time. What made this race more interesting and really more revolting in some ways is that this was a choice between good and evil, and not enough people sided with good. And I think that's where we are in our society. This man, Mr. Bowman, is the one who continually makes coded statements that are designed to appeal to anti-Semites. He routinely picks on the Jewish not-for-profits and the organizations that raise money like AIPAC, always talks about them. Oddly enough, doesn't talk about any other white organizations that do the same thing. So he has targeted the Jewish community, and it was time to put a stop to this. And so when I heard that George Latimer, who's a longtime friend of mine and who helped me orchestrate the change of the Senate from Republican to Democrat in 2008, he is someone who cares about people. And even in his victory speech, he talked about how the people in Washington who have common sense have got to stop talking to each other and stop reacting to the people on the far left. And my final thought is, it's one thing that I was standing next to Latimer, but there weren't too many people bothering to even get involved in this race who should have and didn't. And, you know, particularly right now, as I've said on the show plenty of times, back in the tough times when Martin Luther King was marching in some of the most dangerous places in this country and eventually did lose his life in one of those places, there were, of the whites who marched with him, 65% of the whites were Jewish. Now, the Jews didn't necessarily have any issue in this conflict between the way the Southerners ran their governments and black people who lived under that rule, but they felt that, as King always said, injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere, and that's why they all went down there. And what I wanted to do was demonstrate to people that I heard what Dr. King said, and that's why I was in the Bronx several times, and particularly on his victory night.
Governor, Rabbi, was upset. We were on the phone talking about some of the language that was used by the incumbent, and just reducing the platform to a street level and taking away the dignity that we're trying to restore to the political process and political position. Speak to that, Governor, because I'm frustrated. Of course, I'm a man of the cloth, so moral standards and all that. But
Well,
just civility. I mean, just what holds our society together.
Well, Reverend, when I was 31, I was elected to the New York State Senate, and in my first few years, I was really thinking about trying to turn out the vote among young people. So I had a lot of rallies in which there were rap performers. I mean, people you now would know who were there. And I knew that the language was going to be a little tough and that kind of thing, but that's how young people act. I never had an event, nor did I ever see one, with the profanity, the garbage, I mean, just the horrible contact that they had at that rally. Even AOC, who I probably agree with on like 5% of what she believes in, but she's always conducted herself with a certain amount of class, and I've always respected that, and, always doesn't seem to allow to let herself get antagonized. She was right in the middle of it, along with Bowman.
And
Bowman,
Bernie
by the
Sanders.
way, and Bernie Sanders, poor Bernie, probably never even knew what hit him when he got there. But the thing is that Mr. Bowman happened to be the person who I called 3 times while he was congressman. And the reason was there was a young minority male who graduated high school who wanted to go to West Point. And when they asked me why I was calling, I knew that's why they weren't calling me back. And finally, when I demanded that they give me an answer, they said, well, he should be doing something better than going in the military. So now after this guy gets through high school, they are going to presume to tell him what to do with the rest of his life. And but you know what? Now they don't have to call me back at all.
Well, they will. He may need a job, you know.
Yeah.
Let me ask you something, Governor and Rev. I remember in school coming home with a test score, and my mother would look at it and say, "Joe, is this the best you could do?" And the point was, obviously, you could do better. More effort, you could do better. And I look at what's happening in Washington, and I've come to the realization we no longer ask, is this the best you can do? What we're doing is saying, which is better? You know, that best standard has been lowered. You know, Moynihan would talk about the dumbing down of America. But we no longer seek the best, we seek the better. Is that an accurate depiction, Governor?
I think so. And which is the least of the two harms that could be caused if the other guy, in this case, the two men running, the guy wins. And unfortunately, we're really seeing this. I mean, after that debacle involving President Biden last week, his White House has answered the same question 3 different ways. Did he see a doctor? First, they said no. Then they said yes. And then they said no again. I mean, it's an insult to the public that would actually happen. And, you know, I've always thought if you either make a big mistake that you shouldn't have made or you performed in a way that you're just not proud of, what you do is you own it and then you move on, and you move on with positive ideas and opinions that will perhaps let the public see that you had a bad night. All they do is they go, oh, look, Joe, he had a bad night. I don't know if he had a bad night. A lot of people had a bad night. General Custer, 150 years ago, he had a bad night. And that's a bad night. But this kind of almost insulting the public. And then President Trump, who I've had, my business is not to compliment President Trump, but he hadn't really said anything about this because he was playing with the House's money. He was doing fine. Then he comes out on Friday and says he wants to have a no-holds-barred debate with Trump. Now, I'm sorry, with Biden. I don't know why he would do that. In other words, everything's going his way right now, but it's almost like he just can't, win. He has to win by trying to stomp on someone. And it could backfire because if they had another debate and Biden shows even the slightest improvement, it's going to look like a great improvement because the first improvement was so bad. So I really wish the former president consulted with me before he said something like that.
Governor, talk about the shift. Vice president is a supportive role. It would be awkward for a vice president to try to be presidential and show some type of competition with their boss. So it is definitely a supportive role. But now the spotlight is on Kamala Harris, right? They're looking at her in a different way. The Democratic Party is looking at her in a different way. You know, Republicans are watching. You know, what are your thoughts on the Kamala Harris factor now?
I was kind of surprised to read a poll that showed that she's only 8 points behind President Trump. That kind of surprised me. I would have thought it was a whole lot more because vice presidents never really shine. You only really hear about them when they do something that they shouldn't have done. And so I was sort of surprised by that. But what I would say is she's had the right rhetoric. She's just said President Trump's running. I'm his vice president. We beat him in 2020. We'll beat him in 2024. You know, it's the standard commentary. But it is interesting that we in our history have had vice presidents who got involved even when they really didn't want to, like Vice President Pence having to make what was the correct legal decision about certifying the election in 2020, and Vice President Ford having to move up to be president after President Nixon resigned in 1974. So it is a position that we probably should pay far more attention to But presidential politics just is so over-consuming. It always comes down to being about them.
So,
yeah, it can wear you out. But the Democratic Party, they have to think strategically now that there is a possibility concerning, Joe Biden. And they got to think about the DNC. They got to think about the others who would like to run. If they make a decision like that, the timing is critical. Speak to that, Governor.
One idea really might be, if Biden has to step down, is let the vice president run. She probably will lose, but in the time that she's running, the party could start rebuilding, start kind of drafting those young leaders who could really be the wave of the future. And look, what's the worst thing that can happen? Trump gets elected for a second time. I kind of don't think the country is going to fall into the ocean while he's president. He may do a whole lot of things that a lot of us don't like, but now you're set up to come out in 2028. He cannot run again because you can only serve more than 2 terms. Some people thought it was 2 terms back to back.
Right.
But that's not the way it is legally.
That's an important point. I have to interrupt you there. That's an important point. It's not 2 consecutive terms. It's just 2 terms, period, right. Even though there's a disruption as with Trump, correct? Those are the rules, right, Governor?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Governor, let me ask you this. Looking back at the debate performance, it's not enough to say he had a bad night. I was reading something by Richard Haas. Richard Haas said, well, those say he's not what he was. And Haas's point was, not only is he not what he was, he's not what he needs to be. I mean, that becomes very clear. So how do you come back when it's so obvious that you really can't make the comeback necessary to demonstrate that you can effectively lead? And now when you come back and say, look, I'm not going to schedule events after 8 p.m. at night, it's a further concession to the diminished person that you are. Yeah, diminished capacity. So I don't see how you recover from that. I think the party has to look at this and say, this is not what the country needs right now. We need to make a decision, and we can't continue on this present path.
Well, unfortunately, it's remarks like that either the president or the administration advising him is taking they're taking a tact that really makes them look worse than if they'd said nothing at all. Because how do you start saying I'm going to bed at 8 o'clock from now on when the second debate will start at 9 o'clock?
Yeah.
But they never thought about that.
And God forbid there's any major catastrophe in the country after 8 o'clock,
Exactly.
I'm sorry, but that was funny.
Yeah. Maybe we need to wake up the president. That kind of thing. Terribly, this is a side note, but there was a terrible crash of a flight in Buffalo in 2009, and 48 people were killed, and 2 people in the house that the plane landed on were killed. And my staff did not wake me up. The crash had occurred around 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. I don't find out about it until 7 o'clock in the morning. I'm the last one to the scene, and I got buried to this. And so best advice when you're president, stay as late up as late as you can and get up as early as you can.
Yeah. So where do you see this playing out? If you could predict, do you think they continue with Biden? Do you think open convention? Biden says, I turn it over to Harris. She's my candidate.
I think they'll likely continue with Biden, but they have a real problem is that the big money people that always give to the Democrats clearly seem to be indicating that they've had enough. They want to see someone else. And that's why I was saying if someone else were to run, even if they lose, you're already on your way to rebuilding the party down the road. Mm-hmm. You don't have to now spend 4 more years with Biden trying to think about who will come when he leaves. You can start now. But I think that the worst thing about this entire incident was that it exposed, not that Biden for 90 minutes was operating under some diminished capacity, but also that the administration really didn't have a plan sometimes you have to get up the next day. You don't wait 4 or 5 days. Get up the next day. I was not feeling well. I performed terribly, but I'm not using that as an excuse. I'll be back later on. Right now, let me get back to the business of running the country and campaigning for re-election. It would have been a quick statement. Then you move on. They're like a cat chasing its tail the way they respond to the media.
And I think they hid, or they tried to cover up the diminution of the president prior to the debate. We saw this, ongoing decline, and yet people wouldn't admit it.
Yeah. And, I didn't like when Democrats were criticizing Reagan in his second term, when Reagan clearly was not what he was when he first got elected. And then, the Republicans were saying that Obama wasn't born in the United States and these things. So I kind of took this, Biden's too old, because he's only 2.5 years older than Trump. I just took this to be political rhetoric, but now it's become a legitimate issue. And it's no longer even a question of his health. It's now a campaign issue whether his health gets better or worse.
Okay.
Governor,
last question, Rev.
Look, I would keep him on for the rest of the evening. I mean, come on.
He doesn't go later than 8 o'clock.
But Governor, there was discussion of Trump's appeal to Americans making $50,000 per year or less, based upon our 333 million population. That's about 19% of the population, 63 million American voters. Respond to that, Governor.
I thought that he, and I've always given him credit, was really the first president to recognize the historic black colleges and universities, the HBCUs, and had them to the White House and, arranged for some sponsorship for them and that kind of thing. Then he went on to talk about it, but that was the only specific activity that he took in his first administration. And so I don't know why he'll be any different in his second administration, except that he likes to talk about things in his imagination and then doesn't make it happen. So that's, I didn't hear what I thought was sincerity from him on that subject.
Okay.
All right. Governor David A. Paterson, always enlightening to have you with us. And, ABC is lucky to have you because you bring a certain insight that needs to be heard. And here you are, a member of the Democratic Party, but that doesn't prevent you from being open and honest about your feelings. And I think that says a lot about you.
Well, ABC is lucky to have the two of you. I think it actually should be a TV show on Channel 7.
Well, so far, you've negotiated 50% of the deal. Now convince ABC.
I agree. 100%.
Thank you so much, Governor.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Governor. And thank you, our listeners. We'll be right back to close on 77 WABC, The Rev and The Rabbi.
Reverend A.R. Bernard, Rabbi Joseph Potasnik, The Rev and The Rabbi. Talk Radio 77 WABC and the all-new WABCRadio.com.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
Rev, I think the point is that when people vote, it may not be your best choice, but it's your better choice. And I think we have to compromise. You want to go in and say, I'm so excited. Not everyone's excited about the person. Some are. Some will go a certain direction, say, this is the person but others will say, this is not the person I wanted, but this is the person that we need right now. So I think people have to be very clear. Apathy is not the answer. Staying home and not voting is not the answer.
Absolutely. So let me ask you, Rabbi, in the short time that we have left before we close today's program, is voting a spiritual responsibility or a civic responsibility?
I think it's a hybrid because Jewish tradition says the law of the land in which you live is the law that applies to you. You pay taxes to the government of the country in which you live. You serve in the armed forces of the country in which you live. And I think when you live in a country, you have a responsibility, a biblical responsibility, because you have to participate in the affairs. You can't be a recluse. You pray for the welfare of the government, therefore you have to vote for the government.
That's a great answer, Rabbi. You wrapped it up, summed it up, and closed out the show.
Well,
I love it.
Thank you.
Of course, you've got to cite that. You got to let me know. Okay, where in Jewish tradition do we find that?
No, but I'm saying, I think all of us realize we pledge allegiance to the flag of America. This is our country. We have to support this country, and support means voting for elected officials, not turning your back, saying, it's not my first choice. All right, your second choice, your third choice. Ranked voting is what we now have. You're not going to get the first choice all the time.
And it is a privilege.
Right.
It is. We say it's a civil right, but it's a privilege. A privilege that you lose if you get incarcerated. You become a felon, you go to jail. Yeah. So it's not like, no matter what, you have the right to exercise this. And that's not even getting into the history of marginalization. But yeah, we have to. I like what you said. It's a hybrid.
And if you want to see improvement, get into the arena. Serve on the boards, seek office. Don't just sit back, and be a spectator, be a participant.
Yeah, cursing the darkness. Get involved. Bring the light. Be the light. Okay, great program today, Rabbi.
Well, thank you for making that so. In part. 50% we'll give you. All right.
Come on. Yeah, we're a great team.
Yeah, I love being with you. I really do.
Yeah.
And Ava,
it's a blessing.
Ava Anderson, thank you for all you do in making this possible.
Our engineer. Thank you. And thank you, our listeners, for tuning in faithfully every Sunday morning right here on 77 WABC to the Rev
and the Rabbi.
Hi, it's Lou Dobbs for Priority Gold, America's precious metals dealer. These are volatile times with high inflation, soaring debt, wars on multiple continents, and rising financial stress. Central banks are buying gold to diversify their reserves, so are many Americans. Call Priority Gold and find out how precious metals can help you diversify your portfolio. They're highly rated and happy to help. Call 1-866-303-6357 or get a free gold guide at PriorityGoldGuide.com. That's PriorityGoldGuide.com.